which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we have a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. So every year for the past number of years, Early Childhood Ireland has commissioned Red C to conduct an opinion poll to gauge public attitudes to early years care and education. And just last week, we published the 8th edition of the Early Childhood Ireland Barometer. So I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Frances Byrne to explore the findings of this newest iteration of our barometer. Frances, I'm sure you all know, is the Director of Policy in Early Childhood Ireland, and she has a huge interest in advocating for children in early years and school age care in member settings in Ireland in relation to government policy. So, Frances, you're most welcome, and welcome back, I should say, because we've spoken about the barometer on the podcast a number of times at this stage. And thanks for taking the time for joining me today in what has been a busy week with a lot of barometer coverage. So thanks again, Frances.
Not at all, Maura. I'm delighted to talk about the barometer. It's a great privilege every year that Early Childhood Ireland is able to commission at this stage, our partners in Red C to do this work. It's an enormous privilege to be able to commission a national opinion poll, and we're always delighted to do it and always interested to see the results.
And yeah, the results, it's so interesting to see kind of year on year what trends are, what goes up, maybe a little what goes down. And we'll go into some of those stats and facts and figures in a little while. But why do we do this every year? As I mentioned, it's our 8th year doing it. What's a bit of background? How is it conducted? And how do we, I suppose, use the information that we glean from it?
So I suppose we started doing it because nobody else was doing it. Nobody else was asking the Irish public about their views about early years and more recently school age care. And of course, we include childminding in that. We have had years when we've asked specific questions about childminding before childminding was coming into regulation and so on. And so we do it really to try and find out what are the Irish public's views. We use Red C because they're excellent. They have a very strong methodology. They're able to provide demographic information by region, by age, by gender, by whether people are parents or not, and the ages of their children, by social class, and so on. So that's very valuable for us to know. And so we then go on to use it so we're getting information that helps us to get a sense of what people are thinking about issues that we certainly think in Early Childhood Ireland are very important. And we use it to let the Irish public know that, let policymakers and stakeholders know where things are at. And then I suppose we also use it to remind particularly policymakers, and by that I really mean elected people, if there are moves to do things in a very serious way that might undermine progress within the early years and school age system, particularly if it would undermine high quality for children, access for children, and so on. It has been very valuable for us through the years to actually remind politicians, whether they're in government or not, about, to be fair, the very strong and consistently strong level of support that Irish adults have, and the high regard that early years and school age care is held in, which is the case year on year. So that's really a sort of a broad brush response. I hope I haven't missed anything now else that you asked me more in your question.
No, I think
Okay, good.
you've gone through why we use Red C, why we do it every year and the purposes that we use it with. And you mentioned a little bit there about who's interviewed and that we're able to, or who's consulted, I suppose. I'm not sure what the correct term in relation to an
Polled,
opinion
who's
poll
polled?
is.
Yeah, yeah,
Polled.
yeah.
Um, so, you spoke about who's polled and that we're able to see by gender, by whether they're parents or not, by where they live, by socioeconomic background. And that all gives us really, like you say, really valuable information to, work with people who make policy. Um, and I suppose we use the term creche in a kind of an umbrella way, isn't that right? That, when some of the questions, and we'll be going through some of the questions in a second, when we say creche, we mean the early years sector, people working in the early years, like creches, preschools, childminding, isn't that correct?
So we use terms interchangeably. We did in the for the first couple of polls, we used the word childcare, and we take Red C's advice every year, and they would be of the view that the people you're polling, and these are, a sample of just over 1,000 people. Red C ensures there's a good balance across all the demographics that we talked about. And they have advised us before, sometimes a poll needs to be longer in the field if they're looking and going, well, based on the population of Ireland, we've heard from more men than women. We need to wait a little longer and allow more women to respond, for example. So down through the years, we have been advised by them, and their advice is that people who are responding should be able to understand questions. So we have moved then to using early years and school age care. So we don't use the word childcare when in the statements in the opinion poll, or when we take some of the results and produce them in our annual barometer. That's not the word we use. Although I note that when Red C sends us the results, it says childcare poll on it. And of course it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not our language. So similarly then, for some of the questions, we would use an all-encompassing term that members of the public would understand, regardless of whether they've ever had a child in a setting, or a grandchild, or a niece or a nephew, or whomever, and whether they're so young that it's not even on their radar. And now we're starting to see, of course, children who have become adults who have experience of being in settings. So when it comes to language, we try and stick with the terms we use. Early years and school age care is the term that Early Childhood Ireland uses, and we generally say settings because we think that's the most inclusive term to describe the myriad of settings we have in Ireland. But the advice from Red C would be people outside our system don't necessarily know what a setting is. So we would have to put something in front of setting, and their advice is people know what a creche is. Even though for our members around Ireland, they might be saying, well, a creche for us has a very particular meaning, a preschool has a different meaning, and so on. But this is for the public's understanding.
And of course, it's always important that, that's how you get real data, is that people understand the questions that they're
Yes,
that
of
they're being
course.
asked, that the terms are familiar to them. So thanks for taking us through that so comprehensively, because it was a comment I saw online. So let's drill a bit into some of the facts and figures. How does the public, what kind of numbers did we see from the public about investment in the early years and school age care sector? Is there support for increased investment?
So I suppose we didn't lead with this in the media. We led with a different question. But for me, I suppose the first statement I always look at now is, for me, the first statement, which is every child should be guaranteed access to high quality and inclusive early years and school age care in their community, because that's what we want. Early Childhood Ireland wants. It's not rocket science. Other countries do it. As I often say, and I know Irish parents just cry inside, but if you're living in Denmark, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic circumstances are. It doesn't matter where you live. Doesn't matter if there's a family that's impacted by addiction, by mental health, by disability. It doesn't matter. Your local authority gets in touch with you before your child turns 1, and you have a choice of at least one choice of a place in a what we would call a setting, they call a centre, or with a childminder. That sounds like nirvana in your community. And you then, as a parent or parents, go and look, meet a childminder, or go and look at the setting for the under 3-year-old and make your decision. And that is exactly what Irish children deserve. So that's always the one I look at first. This year, really, really strong again. 76% of the Irish public broadly agree. It rises to 80% for women, as we might expect. It rises for 80% to 80% for parents of very young children from birth to 2 years. And of course, the wonderful province of Munster, which I know would be important to yourself, Maura, it
Of
also
course.
rises to 80%. So we see very high levels, and I'm very heartened by older people, 65 years and plus, it also
Mm.
rises. And I think I always look at that as well, because I think older people, whether they're grandparents or not, definitely very much care about future generations, and it's always a kind of a bellwether. So that's really good. And one of the things that happens is Red Sea sends us what they call the deck of the results, and they put their own commentary on their own observations. And so, they would say that what they have said in their language is that access to high quality early years is universally agreed. In other words, it's so high for them, it's universal, which is lovely to read,
Mm.
and it kind of buoys us. And then the
Just
one
going
that
back to the grandparent
yeah,
one, I
yes,
suppose one of the things that struck me about that, and like you say, it struck me when I was going through the barometer myself, that figure is high. And I wonder, is it because parents don't have a lot of access, like you've mentioned, that they are filling the gap until parents can get a suitable place in their community, or even not in their community, and that they're feeling maybe, stressed by this or overburdened by this, and that, could that be a factor
it
in
could be.
in
We
that?
don't know.
We don't
Equally, I
know.
I often wonder. I often wonder, and I wish that somebody had been doing polls about early years long before us, because
Mm,
then we would have found out attitudes before the beginning of Etchi.
mm,
So I wonder about older people, whether they're grandparents or not, just observing the good that has come from the so-called free preschool year, and now, as we know, it's 2 years.
mm,
So I'm not disagreeing with you at all, and we don't know more. You could well be right.
mm.
It could be that. It could be that grandparents are very conscious, but of course, not everyone 65 plus is a grandparent.
I know.
So, in that broad swathe of people, I just wonder, have they become older during a period when we've had the free preschool year, and do they see it, those who are grandparents, or do they hear it locally, the importance of it? Like, I remember, and I wasn't working in Early Childhood Ireland at the time, but I remember Etchi starting, and I remember friends of mine who were teachers within a very short amount of time saying things to you quietly, like, you can tell the children have been to preschool when they come in to junior infants. So, people of all ages are picking that up. So, look, we don't know, but it's very heartening to see that support from older people. We
Totally.
also know older people vote. And so it's important for politicians to see that there's high support among older people as well. But it's very heartening to see that support from the
Mm.
older generation.
Yeah, it was just something that struck me, and I mean,
Mm.
absolutely, you have to be careful of extrapolating
No.
without evidence. So, can you take us through, some of the other findings from the various questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the next one I always look at is, they don't always come in this order, but my eyes fall, is the importance of education the education of under fives is as important as the education of children over five. And we have seen this slightly move up and down over the years, but it has really stayed in and around the 2/3 mark. And that's really heartening as well. And that's very good for us to see, and for us to be telling politicians and others that, there's a real value put on. And again, I don't believe that would have been the case a few years ago, simply because we now are in a scenario where, like, when those friends of mine, teachers, were talking to me, it wasn't the case that every single 3-year-old was attending a preschool. Now we know that 97, just over 97% of eligible 3-year-olds attend participate in the ETI program and attend preschool. So certainly it's in the psyche now. Like, it would, I say this, said this before, it'd be a very brave no politician is going to take away ETI. Never, ever, ever. It has become built in, which is really, really good. 70, another high result, 75% agree that early years education should be free to all children, which is very interesting. And again, there are movements depending on demographics on that one as well. So that's a very high that's a very high finding, and again has stayed high. We also ask in Early Childhood Ireland, we very much care about the first year of children's lives. We would very much like to see family leave improved financially. And certainly, again, we see that staying quite steady. 65% of adults agree that parents should be financially supported to stay at home with their child for the first 12 months of the child's life. And there's a very interesting gender gap here. That increases to 71% for women, but falls to 58% for men. And I will make no further comment except draw attention to it, because I shouldn't be laughing. But I think it's interesting. I think it says a lot about our society. But anyway, then we've had another one which we always, which we've included for the last few years, which is, so we asked the question about should it be free? It isn't free. So we ask, should parents pay towards the care of their children in line with their overall income? 58% agree with that, and that rises and lowers again depending on the demographics. For the second year in a row, and we got roughly the same result. We asked if employers should be legally obliged to top up wages when the parents of new babies are on maternity or paternity leave. 56% agree. And again, there's numbers around that. Some are a little lower, some are a little higher, depending on the demographics. There's a 6% gender gap as well. And then we asked for the second year, again, about whether staff who have university degrees should have the same terms and conditions, and 54% agreement. Interestingly, that jumps up to 59% among women and lowers to 49% among men. So that's interesting. And again, we're seeing higher levels of support for this with parents of very young children, and they're matched by the older age group as well, which is so interesting. And then we ask the kind of generic question, as with teachers, the government should pay the wages of staff in creches, and just around the 49%, around 50%. And again, that has sort of fell a little bit from last year, but it has more or less held. So that's interesting. We're going to keep asking that question. And as we know now, the government is already contributing because of the payment of the employment regulation order and so on. So that's really now a scan through it. Obviously, the whole barometer with demographics full on some and a few on others is available on our website. And we're very happy to take questions. People ask us very interesting questions about it, and sometimes prompt us to think about future areas. So policy@earlychildhoodireland.ie is the best email, but we welcome questions on it, and very happy to engage with people about it anytime. And as I said, members do get in touch, and others, wanting to know more or wanting to understand or trying to understand what's behind particular percentages. Yeah.
In passing, you mentioned, about some of the trends and it being, same as last year or a slight drop or more or less the same, and that. Have you anything further to say about the trends, particularly on the questions that we've been asking,
for a few years
over a longer period?
Yeah. So we did see, and those who get the barometer religiously and read it from cover to cover, it's not that long, will have noticed this. And certainly when we reached 5 years, this is our 8th, we did produce the previous year's findings. And we certainly saw during COVID, particularly in 2021, only in 2021, because we had done the 2020. We saw it a little bit in 2022, but much more so. We definitely saw a decrease, some of it significant, as in, so the margin of error. If you're doing a poll of 1,003 people, which was what Red C did for us this year, the margin of error is 3.2%, which means any of those findings. So if we take the 76% one, that could be 79 or it could be 73. It's the same with political opinion polling, but we did see significant outside the margin of error drops. And Red C, again, they're just great partners and so informative, and sent the results and said, will you give us a call? So I did, and they said, look, we're seeing this across the board. Obviously, they don't share any information with us from other clients. But what they said was that, they do enough polling for enough people that at the time, and of course, we can all remember it well, there was such uncertainty. And so in some ways, 2021 was almost worse than 2020 because we were in it in 2020. You didn't know what it looked like. And then I think going back into lockdown and everything in 2021, you might remember there were a lot of concerns about economics, about what way, the cost of, even though people, I think, were very pleased about social welfare payments and all the other things that happened. So Red C's advice to us was anything that's perceived as it's going to have a long-term cost. So if you're guaranteeing access to every child, that's going to have an additional cost, to a place in a and similarly pay and other things. So we certainly did see, and we did see those lower levels stay in 2022, and since then they've come up again. So that's really good to see. And it's not just us seeing it. Red C is drawing our attention. So when they give us the headlines, they're saying this is consistent, and they really like, and they've been very supportive. They really like that we ask multi-annual questions. They enjoy that. It's important. But they also take stock themselves as pollsters, and they put their own comment and take, which is very helpful for us to see. So they would use words like consistent. This is, consistently now we're seeing continuing consistent support for, and so on. So that's very good for us to see. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember you discussing that, and it was so interesting that COVID, even though, so many people, and we've mentioned this before in other episodes of the podcast about budget submissions and the budget manifesto and so on, that, people see the benefits of, they recognize the importance of, but that in COVID, that kind of that dip happened, which was just so interesting.
It really is. And then it just, when I look back, it just brings you right back to that uncertainty of that year,
and yet the importance of early years was hugely
well, this is the
recognized
other
at
side
that
of it, you see.
time,
So to
which
be
was
very frank, I
so
remember that
interesting.
poll arriving, and I was really grateful when the email came, make sure you give us a call, because I wouldn't always have a phone call, afterwards, beforehand, certainly. And I really appreciated it. It turned into a bit of a counselling session, if I'm being honest, because I was a bit heartbroken, because I thought, well, hang on a minute, we saw this unbelievable, rallying of the Irish public recognising, and parents on the airwaves, and the government, to be fair, put unprecedented investment into the system, and relaxed a lot of rules around attendance. If only that had continued, but that's a whole other day's debate. And so it was a bit of a setback. I mean, it was a bit like going in, with your mask on the bus. I'll never forget it, for the announcement of Budget 2021, and there literally being like childcare in inverted commas was a footnote, and us being devastated. And I remember RTE looking for an interview, and the cameraman saying, "What did you get?" And I was saying, well, "Who are you with?" Blah blah blah. "What did you get?" And I was saying, "We got nothing." And they were like, "But all we heard about for 6 months was childcare." Their words, not mine.
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, so it reminded me of that on the one hand, we'd seen this, investment, the importance of it for children, enormous focus on outdoors, like enormous focus on really positive aspects of what settings are delivering for children, how safe settings were, beautiful things that people did to keep in touch with children, like all the gorgeous things we saw in the middle of absolute trauma about COVID. And then you're looking at a budget and you're looking at a poll going, oh my God, but it was more a reflection of, and that's why it was I really appreciated Red C saying, we're telling you this, as advice.
It's
We're
not
seeing this
just
across
not
the
just
board
us.
in
Yeah,
all aspects. Anything that looks like it's going to have a cost in the future, people are really worried and concerned, which made
cautious.
total sense. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And as I said, we've seen things climb back up, so it's a big relief.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I suppose on that line, and kind of as we come near the end, I suppose this is where what I was going to just ask you a little bit about next is that the people who participated in the poll, like we said, may not have children, may have older children gone past the age
They may,
range.
yeah.
So when somebody might say, why is it only 54% think that we should have the same terms and conditions as teachers in primary schools? These aren't people who have a connection or an involvement with early years. So,
No.
very often if people don't identify with something, they kind of say, why should we
Yeah,
be
I mean,
spending money on it?
this is one of the big challenges we have as an organization, that absolutely, the poll is representative sample from across. So of course there are people who aren't parents, or as you say, this period is long over for them, or whatever it might be. Or they're too young yet, or whatever it might be. They're all over 18, mind you. So, but one of the challenges we have is that this is a transient phase, and things, notwithstanding the improvements that have been made in Ireland in the last few years, and there have been absolutely great improvements, there's an awful lot of expectation being baked in. So you'll often talk, even anecdotally, to people in your own life who are expecting their first or second child, and they will talk about the first few years of the child's life and the things that they hear about waiting lists and the things that they know about costs. There's almost a kind of an acceptance. And so there isn't that push to get things changed, is one thing. And then it's a transient phase. So your child starts school and it's almost like you forget, about the pain of it, and it's so baked in. So that's definitely a challenge. On the other hand, like, I don't let us off the hook either. Like, Early Childhood Ireland has a very good story to tell, and we need to be telling it more. And we did tell it in the lead up to the election, about the importance of graduates and the reality of what happens to graduates in the system. Very many never come in, very many
Absolutely.
come in and then leave. Now, to balance that, there are also, as we know, and we meet them in Maynooth this time of the year, and they're doing a day's work. They have a qualification, and they're going to Maynooth and other third level institutions around the country at night in their own time to get their qualification. So, but in the middle of all of that, for us, there's a grave inequality. And the grave inequality is that if you're a young man, a young woman, an old man, an old woman, and you have exactly the same level of qualification as your counterpart in a primary or secondary school, you can only dream about those terms and conditions. Every teacher in Ireland deserves those terms and conditions,
Yeah.
and so do the people who work in our system. And so for us, this is a challenge for us as an organisation, which I don't take lightly, and I kind of welcome it and relish it. That
Mm.
we really need to be talking about this more. We've been doing an analysis, one of the colleagues, on this Eurydice report that has come out, and I was just saying at a meeting earlier, 2 days hasn't gone past when this colleague hasn't said to me, "Oh my God, we're the only country in Europe that doesn't," or we're one of three countries that doesn't do the following. So that has been in the weekly the last few weeks. I would urge people to read up on it. So even though an awful lot of good things have happened, we have seen us reach €1 billion investment. I didn't think that would happen this side of 2028. And we've seen other things. We've a great workforce plan. We need big, bold steps. And for Early Childhood Ireland, one of those big steps is to signal, to put money where the mouth is, but to also signal the value that our society places on people, the 30,000 workforce who are working in 4,700 settings across Ireland. We absolutely see an employment regulation order, and that's so important. We see qualifications, we see people going back at night. All of those people, regardless of whether they're graduates or not, they need better terms and conditions. But there's something very particular happening with graduates, which is deeply flawed and deeply unequal. And it's one of the steps that needs to be taken by government to signal that they understand the value of the whole system, to treat people equally. And so for us, if the new minister, and we hope to be meeting her soon, was to say, look, I can only achieve one thing, we would say, well, we know that you're looking at affordability and that will bring in greater investment, but it's not going to make a bit of difference to the bottom line for settings. If you were to name a date to do this, it would immediately lift people. It would mean that our member settings could have conversations with staff who are arriving or with future staff or with students on placement to say, look, I won't be able to do it for you next year or the year after. But Minister Foley and the government have said by 2020, whatever that number is, 2027, 2028, we are going to guarantee that the terms and conditions, and the government is going to pay for it. All kinds of conversations could take place. And we firmly believe that that constant pressure about staffing would lift, because there would be people, and also there would be more students going in to do the courses. There'd be more students coming out and going into settings. So even though it might be 2 or 3 years away, it would cause such an immediate lift. For us, it's really important. And we do as an organisation, I'm being very, very honest with our great listeners to the podcast, we need to up our game as early childhood Ireland to really, really hammer that home. We've had all kinds of interest from members on this, lots of engagement with questions about it. Absolutely nobody saying, no, please don't do that. Nobody.
No. I think there are two things. I mean, one is that, like you say, there are school leavers going into college. There are people who have already got their level 5 and 6 and so on going in. They need to see early years as a career path, not a stepping stone to another sector.
Exactly.
And there's also something about the value that government places on children under 6.
100%. This is it, you see. So if a huge number of adults are saying, we absolutely agree that the care and education of young children is as important as when they start school, the government is falling behind. The government is behind the people, and regretfully not for the first time, on an important social issue. This is an important social issue. We know that in other countries, this is not rocket science. It's just done. It's baked in. Just like Etchi here will never be taken away. It will never be taken away. And nor should it be. Because these are countries where children's rights are progressed and valued. But also, and let's be really honest about this, there's a gender equality dimension to this because of the way most people organise their lives. Apologies to all the brilliant stay-at-home dads. But in the round, that's the way people organise their lives. And those countries have also seen an economic win-win. So for children, for society, and for the economy, this is a no-brainer. Children should be getting this anyway. They should absolutely be vindicating their rights. But it also happens to deliver enormous benefits for society and the economy. And, it's not some magic brush that's going to solve every single problem that's facing families, but it is a very important element of family support for families that are undergoing particular challenges. And then, of course, very few families don't experience challenges at some point during their, we often say childhood is short, but it is short for children, but it's 18 years, all kinds of things can happen. So we must have all of those children, at the front of our concerns. And I get the affordability, not opposed to it, depending on how it's done, but it's not going to be enough on its own. And that's a kind of a harsh message to be giving to a new government, but that's the truth. And I suppose what we're buoyed by in Early Childhood Ireland is the Irish public is absolutely squarely behind us, which is great.
And it's not like it's the first time we've said it. We said it to the old government and the government before that.
But Maura, we're going to keep saying it.
And we're going to keep saying it.
And it is important to say that we've really welcomed the media coverage this week. And it's been, I think, across 18 or 19 of the 26 counties. We're delighted about that, and there'll be more coming in. We got great national coverage as well. But we are now looking to meet, we've a lot of new members of the Oireachtas. We'll be looking to meet them when we've one renewed spokesperson and 2 new spokespeople in opposition. As I said, we're looking to meet the Minister when the Oireachtas Committee on Children is formed. We'll be looking to meet those members, and we will be talking about the Barometer at every single one of those meetings, because politicians need to understand this. They put a great value on opinion polling. I never believe them when they get on the airwaves and say, "Oh, but sure, it's only a poll."
It's only on the
They
day.
care deeply about polls. So and that's the other reason why it's a privilege to have this in our pockets. But we will absolutely be meeting them and letting them know new and renewed members of the Oireachtas that, Irish people really support early years and school age care, really support settings, really support children, and really support staff.
Really enjoyed that, Frances. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and going through it. And it's just fascinating to see the trends and the differences between maybe the ages of the adults and the gender breakdown and so on. So thanks for taking us through it. And like you mentioned, if anybody wants to see the press release and the full barometer, it's there in lovely colour on our website. So Frances, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Maura.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Irish Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.